Henry Bermudez was born in the Venezuelan city of Maracaibo, one of the largest oil production regions of the world.
Yo tendría que decir que Maracaibo tiene una idiosincrasia muy particular.
I think that Maracaibo has a very unique idiosyncrasy. This is a region where the Europeans, the Indians, and the Africans mix spiritually and culturally. In my paintings, I talk about that encounter, about the history of the gods and the people of this region. I believe that the way for an artist to become universal is to express their own culture.
Y eso es lo que me ha nutrido a mí.
In 1965, he attended the National Schools of Fine Arts in Maracaibo. During this first period of his life as an artist, Bermudez drew in ink on paper.
When I finished my art studies, I became a teacher in a school in a small town called Bobure. There, I had a room that was facing the jungle, and every time I left my windows open, different animals, birds, snakes, and spiders would come in. And if I left the room, monkeys would come in and mess up all my stuff. It was unbelievable. This was a revelation and a learning period in my work as an artist. That explains why I use animals and jungle vegetation in my paintings. This was an intense period of learning and inspiration. The art school gave me the techniques, but the magical and mystical worlds I create in my paintings come from the influence that Bobure had on me.
From the beginning, Bermudez has been on a journey to experience the world and to get to the authentic core of art making. In 1977, he moved to Mexico City, where he studied for 3 years at Mexico's National School of Fine Arts. Mexico's culture and archaeological art became a reference and a point of departure, which made his work gain coherence and the development of a personal style.
Yo llego a México en el año 1977 buscando el contexto latinoamericano.
I went to Mexico trying to understand the modern Latin American art movements. I was impressed by the colors used by the traditional Mexican clothing and by the decorations used in their crafts and pottery. I immediately incorporated color into my paintings.
El color de la artesanía mexicana.
Also, I studied the archaeological Mexican art. Mexico's archaeology has been a source of fundamental inspiration in my work. I have to add that Mexico also gave me a sense of self-esteem and showed me that, as a Latin American painter, my work could be universal.
Y ser muy universal.
While living in Mexico, Bermudez also found himself inspired by the different Latin American art movements of the time. He met with many artists from around the world that confronted him with new ideas. He studied the work of the Mexican muralists Siqueiros, Orozco, and Diego Rivera and incorporated into his painting the way muralists expressed themselves. After all these years, even though he prefers the canvas, many art critics consider him a muralist.
Empezamos a viajar por el sur de México, en la península de Yucatán.
In one of my trips to the south of Mexico, I met a medicine man that used snakes as a way to cure people. After some initial resistance, we became friends, and I spent some time with him. He was going to teach me how to capture snakes. I remember the night when he took me into a room where he had his magical potions. It was a collection of bottles containing different kinds of snakes mixed with colored liquids, alcohol, and tree bark. The time I spent with this brujo was an experience I will never forget. Some time after my visit, a new character started to appear in my paintings that I called the Snake Charmer. It was inspired by that experience. In the character's face, you can see the contortions and movements of the snakes, the texture of the tree barks, and the scales of the snakeskin.
In 1980, supported by a government grant, Bermudez lived 3 years in New York taking courses at the Art Students League. This was an introspective period for Bermudez. He was astonished by cosmopolitan New York, by the art scene, and by its museums and galleries.
Nueva York me va a dar la visión del arte internacional. Ver
New York taught me and gave me a perspective on how the international art market runs, where and how the work of the most important artists of our times are exhibited. Also, the museums of this impressive city allowed me to visit the best collections of archaeological art from around the world.
de arte africano. Esto fue fundamental en mi obra.
Since age 21, Bermudez has won many renowned art competitions around the world, and his work has been acquired by prestigious museums, galleries, and private collections throughout Europe and the Americas. He was selected to represent Venezuela in the 1986 Venice Biennale, one of the premier art events in the world. In 1985, Bermudez moved to Italy to prepare his exhibit and spend the next 2 years traveling across Europe studying the great works of the Renaissance artists.
I had an important realization over my own work when I visited the Sistine Chapel in Rome. There, I realized an interesting parallel between my painting and Michelangelo's masterpiece of The Temptation and Fall of Adam and Eve. I was using the same elements and symbolism in my paintings than those used by Michelangelo's in the ceiling of the chapel. For example, Michelangelo painted the snake with a human torso, and I was painting Quetzalcoatl, the supreme gods of the Aztecs, represented by a snake with a bird's head. He painted the Tree of Knowledge, and I had been including an archaeological and mystical jungle typical of South America. I had Adam as a snake charmer. But then I realized that I didn't have an Eve. Well, one day while visiting the Uffizi Museum in Florence, I stopped in front of a painting done by Piero della Francesca on the Duchess of Urbino. I was very impressed. For me, it was a revelation. Later, after some reflection, I incorporated the image of the Duchess into my paintings. I realized that I had found my Eve and at the same time an element that represented the European culture and the blend of different races that happened in the Americas, conforming what we are now today, a new culture formed by mixtures of natives, Europeans, and Africans. That is what the Duchess of Urbino represents in my paintings.
Ese es el sentido que yo le he dado a la Duquesa de Urbino.
Bermudez is a neo-realist who paints in large formats. In his paintings, he creates fantastic and complex worlds that draw on a variety of mythologies, such as Incan, Mayan, African, and European. His work represents the archetypal encounter which happened during the European colonization of the Americas. Bermudez has accomplished a personal language which suggests the existence of a Latin American identity among the universal art expressions. The scenes and characters in his paintings, although contradictory, are overtly sensual and internally spiritual.
La última etapa de mi trabajo, esta etapa con los puntos.
This new series of paintings I call dreams, because I use my dream state to mix all my present and past experiences together. It is a process where I let my mind reflect while I'm sleeping, allowing the images come to me automatically.
Que yo luego coloco en la obra.
Bermudez has lived in Philadelphia since 2003, working with the city's mural arts program. He's developed a close relationship with Philadelphian communities that have allowed him to create murals that reflect their lives. Living a new reality in a big American city has led Bermudez to a new period in his painting. A black background filled with golden dots has covered the canvas, creating a vast empty space that becomes the main protagonist.
Cuando yo empiezo,
Now,
me siento
when
en
I
la
sit
mesa
in
de
front of the
dibujo,
canvas, I try not to impose my ideas. Sometimes I start to paint with no purpose. I guide myself through the images that appear in the canvas, letting them evolve and influence other images, sliding the brush softly over the material, allowing the brush and the canvas to communicate with one
y me
another.
voy guiando por ellas.
The uses of new techniques, such as collage, pointillism, and gold leaf, have had its transforming and powerful effect over the pictorial expression. The characters, which were once prominent in his prior works, are now distant, vanished, or asleep in the painter's subconscious.
Aparece la cosa laberíntica.
I find it
creando.
interesting that the maze is one of the images that is recurrent in my latest paintings.
La imagen
Its elliptical symbol suggests a search for a center or periphery, for an entrance or an exit.
una forma elíptica.
Just like entering a maze, we live our lives gravitating around events or particular circumstances that force us to choose on different paths. These are the roads of consciousness, although most of the time it is a subconscious behavior.
Espiral.
Now, when I sit in front of the canvas, I get in contact with my dreams. Dreaming the oldest dream in nature, the one that transformed the animal soul into human.